The first thing we see here is that God leads his people for their well-being. God leads his people for their well-being. Let me read verses 17 and 18 again. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. So Egypt and the Promised Land, there's a direct route that they could have taken. And Moses is letting us know, we didn't go that way. We did not go by the way of the Philistines. We did not go by the way of the sea. And he tells us why. God knew that they would change their minds. God knew what Israel, the people, were able to bear. God knew that the threat of war and the continual war on the way of the Philistines would be a discouragement to them, to the point that they would want to return to Egypt. See, as we look throughout the Old Testament, Egypt is always this temptation for Israel. Even though they were enslaved there, they're constantly tempted to go back to Egypt because they somehow in their mind think that's comforting. Egypt is a powerful nation, so whenever they're threatened, they think, well, we'll just go back and we'll be under the umbrella of Egypt. Well, there's nothing really wrong with Egypt necessarily. The problem is that they're not trusting God. God is supposed to be their refuge. They are looking to a nation. God looks and he says they will lose heart and they will want to return to Egypt. And he's right. After the boot camp in the wilderness, Moses sends spies to look at the land. And the spies come back and they say, oh, they're mighty, they're giants, we're grasshoppers compared to them. And Israel becomes afraid. They want to go back to Egypt. They're afraid. They don't trust God. So instead of the war up north, God directs them to another battle. We see how fickle their faith is even then. Because God hardens Pharaoh's heart. He sends Pharaoh after Israel in the desert. And the people of Israel look around and they complain and they grumble to Moses again. They say, and you can look in chapter 14, verse 11, were there not enough graves in Egypt? Now, God is protecting them from grumbling and complaining by going north. This is how bad they complain and grumble by going south. Can you imagine what they would have said? What they have accused God of? What they have grumbled and murmured against God if they had gone north? God is protecting them because they are a weak people. Now, again, they've just seen God completely and utterly destroy the nation of Egypt. They were able to see that in many of the plagues, they were completely protected and Egypt was devastated. They've seen the mighty right hand of God, and yet still they doubt. Still they have a problem trusting God. They are going to have to be sent into the wilderness so that they learn to trust God because they so quickly forget. Now, God is protecting them. He's leading them with wisdom. He's leading them according to what they can handle. He's leading them to protect them and to care for them. And he's going to put them in a 40-year boot camp in the wilderness. And this has two reasons. One, to teach them who they are. The Exodus 19, the Mount Sinai event, there's such a great declaration, you are my holy nation, my royal priesthood. He's going to teach them who they are so they learn to trust him. Or really to say it another way, he's getting the grumble out. The people are so prone to complaining and grumbling and failing to trust God. And God is going to send them into the desert so they can continue to see his mighty hand. They continue to see the power of God. They continue to see his faithfulness. Well, friends, if we're really going to appreciate what God is doing here in his leadership, if we're going to appreciate how God is leading Israel in the desert out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, we're going to have to recognize that we're very much like Israel. We're prone to grumble. We're prone to complain. If you don't believe me, let's go to 1 Corinthians 10. This is a passage that you should be reading throughout the next few weeks. Paul is referring to the next few chapters in 1 Corinthians 10, and it's extremely instructive for how we can see God working throughout all of history for us. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 10. I'll begin in verse 1, and I'll read through to verse 13. 1 Corinthians 10. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now this is where we make that key transition. These things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drank, and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed, lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. And the first thing we want to see here is that these things we're studying right now, Paul immediately says, referring to them directly, these things happen for us, the church, for whom the end times has come, for them who are now the benefits of all the promises. These things took place for our instruction. They're examples, they're warnings. Do not be like Israel. Now, why would Paul need to warn them? It's because as a church, we're prone to grumble. We're prone to complain. We're prone to ask, well, where is God? And why is he not working the way I expected him to? We are like Israel. We also need to see that we need his protection from temptation. Look at verse 13 again. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. We see in Exodus, he didn't send them to the way of the Philistines because that was way too tempting for them. He protected them from that. Now they're going to go through trials of the desert, but God led them and protected them from temptation that would have been overbearing, overwhelming for them. God leads us. And his leadership be encouraging. First, God guides us for our good. God does not lead us into temptation. God leads us into trials and helps us through those trials. God is protecting us for our good. He protects us from temptation. We should be praying constantly, as the Lord taught us, lead us not into temptation. Protect us from those temptations that would crush us. Finally, God never leads us into a temptation that will ultimately overcome us, overthrow us, and destroy us. We can actually see this very clearly in 2 Corinthians 4. You don't turn there. Let me read it to you. But 2 Corinthians 4, beginning in verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. We're going to go through trials. We're going to go through temptations. God's going to lead us in and through them. But as Paul says here, we'll be perplexed, but we won't be driven to despair. We'll be afflicted, but not crushed. The reason we will be afflicted, but not crushed, is that the Christian always has hope. We go through trials. We go through difficult times. We go through times when we really should express the affliction, the perplexed, the persecution, the feeling of being struck down. But we must always remember that if God is for us, nothing can destroy us. If God is for us, He cares for us. He protects us. If you're in the middle of a trial, that trial is for your good. That trial is meant to purify you. That trial is meant to teach you. God has not sent you into a trial that's more than you could possibly bear. God is with you in the midst of your temptation. God is with you in the midst of your trial. You are never crushed if you're a Christian, because you always have hope. Because you believe in the sovereign God who is even able to use evil for good. When we face trials, we'll be purified by God. When our faith is tested, it will be refined. If you're in the midst of a trial, be of good courage. Don't hide the affliction, don't hide the pain, but be of good courage. That's the paradox of the Christian life. We will go through great trials, but we must count them as joy, because we know that God will use them for our well-being. God will carry us through them to teach us and to help us to love Him more. The way you do that is to cling to His promises. Cling to the promises that God has given us, that all things work for good for those who love God. Cling to the promises that He is with you. He will never forsake you. He's leading and guiding and caring for you. We must recite and remember God's redemption. Go back and read the story of Joseph. Go back and remember how God carried him through numerous trials. Every time he seemed like he got a break, another trial would come, and God would use it for His own glory and for Joseph's well-being.